Chinese animated film Ne Zha is sweeping the country with its rebellious teen hero, entertaining yet meaningful plot and first-class production. The film, based on the well-known Chinese folk tale, has crushed a series of records in China's box office for animated films. As the highest-grossing Chinese animated feature of all time, Ne Zha raises hope for the country's animated film industry. So what are the secrets behind the hugely successful film? How much potential do characters and legends from traditional Chinese culture have to be further developed and brought back to screens? To discuss these issues and more, I'm very happy to be joined in the studio by Mr. Teng Jimeng, a regular movie critic, as well as a counterpart, Han Hua, also a movie critic on CGTN. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Yang Rui. Welcome to Dialogue. Everybody's asking the same question. What's the key to its huge success? Helen.
I think it's not a very unique, secret of Ne Zha's success. It's just a regular formula of every successful film, which involves the music, the storyline. The story is very compelling to itself, and it's based on a Chinese folktale, but it has evolved into many different storylines that can be developed and engaged with the modern Chinese audiences. It's one part of the formula. In addition to that, the characters and even the dubbing of the film is also very appealing. You must know that the success of a box office blockbuster must be the music can be developed and also can be sang, can be echoed by the audience. That's also the success of this film.
Jimeng, I'd like to ask you whether you are aware of the age groups, the demographics of the moviegoers. I mean, since the younger generations seem to be pretty rebellious, adopting different way of thinking and lifestyle compared with their parents and grandparents. This movie and its storyline seems to just echo their concerns. Do you think this also comes across as a strong element that contributes to the box office?
Well, yes, absolutely. I think the demographics are all actually pointing us to this very young Z generation, Chinese millennial generation, born basically in the 1990s and up to the 2000. So basically this is the younger generation, the so-called the computer generation, the internet savvy generation, and animation loving generation. And so first thing first, I think characterization should be a key factor to its success. The characterization by imbuing this new creative force and energy to this very legendary character Ne Zha, and also the kind of a modern meaning given to this very character, the resonance. I mean, the modern resonance given to this very character speak volume to this current young Z generation here in China. And so that's why they flock to movie theater to watch a rebellious character, as you said.
Can both of you very quickly tell us the story itself? Because you don't expect our audience, particularly overseas audience, to know what's going on. Sure. What's the story itself, Helen?
Yes. Yeah, I think it's Teng Jimeng's turn to tell us,
just let us know.
With the
yeah, absolutely.
story.
I mean, there are two basic plots regarding this Ne Zha. One is in 1979, Ne Zha triumphed against the Dragon King. Now, this is a total antithesis to that very 1979 version. Now is a totally new and kind of a recreative and, in my words, a nostalgic movie of the older version. So it's about the young kids, the third princess of the Li family, rebelling against the Dragon King out there, and eventually goes out of the way. And the common metaphor at that point in the film is, I control my fate. My fate is not predetermined by God. And so the resonance, the story plot, the narrative strategy is totally different from the previous one. The previous one is all about following the traditional narrative. Rebel against the parent, rebel against the Dragon King, and by killing all the evils. But now this character is both evil and also just.
A few years ago, we saw box office success of Return of Da Sheng and the Monkey King, based on the very famous classic novel Pilgrimage to the West. Yes. However, everybody understands that during the feudal times, it's no easy job to display your rebellious character under the high-handed suppression of the ruler, the emperor, so to speak, it was a big surprise why many years, many centuries ago, we had this classic novel, Pilgrimage to the West, which portrays a rebellious monkey against the strength of Sakyamuni. What do you think of, you know, the background against which Naja was portrayed? Because we have to take a second look at why and how rebellious this character is.
Well, once again, I mean, the whole film is based on the novel known as The Investiture of Gods. I mean, 封神演义. And in this sense, it is a story plot centering around the father and the son, the king Li Jing, and also his third princess, versus this king character, the dragon king character. And so the whole background is about Naja being given this new power by Tai Zhenren, and in this sense, the new power given to this young kid is, originally is all about rebelling against the powerful authority, right the wrongs done to the people, but with all these 9 dragon characters. And so this time around, it's totally different. Naja is given that very magic power, but that magic power actually allowed him to be both good and evil. In a sense, the magic power ball now being in the hands of a young person totally out of control. I mean, there's no right or wrong.
Perhaps that's the Chinese version of a Transformer, Superman, or Spider-Man in Hollywood to provide a little character with the supernatural forces. So, Helen, I wonder if you have noticed yet another strong element that led to the success of this box office, the use of a 3D animated film in IMAX format.
Yes.
Why did it take so long for the Chinese animated film industry to adopt the format? How does IMAX enhance the viewing experience of Naja particularly?
I think it's an evolving process. We actually, even in the animated films in China 20 years ago, when, if we remember, if we can recall, you know, the very first modern animated film, if we can call that, the Lotus Latin, we have already introduced the then modernized animated or 3D technology into that film, but we still adopt the very traditional handmade painting of that film. That was a big success because of the combination of the Chinese traditional handmade painting as well as the international 3D technology. So it's kind of an evolving process that up to now, because the investment of a movie, especially the animated movie, is so uncertainty in terms of the box office in China market. So I think that China animated movie producers were being very cautious of introducing the modern technology, the ever-evolving modern technologies into their production process. But this time, you know, given probably the focus study as well as the market analysis of this film, bearing in mind that this film has been produced under the development, a very long development process. It took 5 years to make it to the big screen. So it's much longer than the average movie production time. So at that time, the moving technology in terms of the other tactics that can be introduced into a movie production and promotion process. It's ever evolving, so that I think IMAX, as well as the modern technology, can be introduced. It's the right time to be introduced. And also the IMAX certainly helps, like Professor Teng Jingmeng pointed out. In addition to the Z generation moviegoers, I view this film as a all-age group, you know, for all moviegoers. So that is also the help of the IMAX technology to be introduced and also contribute to the box office in a justified revenue on the investment.
Well, at least 2 generations of the Chinese have fallen in love with the IMAX format deeply and madly. Hollywood is going back, or Walt Disney is going back to basics such as Lion King.
The Lion King, yes.
The Lion King is just so different from the traditional way of IMAX. Why do you think it's also a big success? And what kind of inspirations can we draw from the success of Walt Disney?
Well, once again, creativity is key to the success of Lion King. I mean, technology, like Helen said, technology would add to this very great success, the box office revenue, but at the same time, it is also a useful tool to tell a good story, tell a better story. In Lion King, for example, the story didn't change that very much. Still, it follows that very father and son, the kind of a relationship based on this very Hamlet story, right? A Shakespearean story, in terms of retaliating and killing and right the wrongs and killing the bad guys in this sense. But then once again, see, IMAX is a huge tool to attract this very new demographics back into the theater. It contributes to actually bring the old, the young back to the theater to view with a new, totally brand new experience. Plus the voice and plus the dubbing and the music that Helen also mentioned at that very point.
Very much like universality of music as a language across the traditional boundaries of nation states. Do you think good products of the box office may also know no boundaries, such as the controversial response of Wandering Earth in the United States? Do you think this time around Naja will have a very different outcome in terms of being released in overseas markets, Helen?
Yeah, I like your usage of no boundaries, the words. I think from the very beginning of the inception of a movie, a successful movie, from the very beginning, I think Hollywood writers, they certainly have certain advantages by having a group of team working with the writers to have a very good story, a very successful narrative from the very beginning, and then they will build up the story around the successful marketing plan and also the crew, the casting, everything else. So for Naja to go into the international market like the Wandering Earth did not do that well in the international market. Certainly for Chinese movie, it is for sure that currently all the big blockbusters in China can go to the international markets, and the international studios are happy to cooperate with the successful Chinese movies. But having that said, I think if Naja wants to have a big say or have a success in the world international box office, then it needs to do some homework. Maybe it's already a little bit late to do this kind of homework, because I don't think the team has already expected the success of this box office in China, domestic, in mainland. So I think in terms of the marketing plan, it needs to be started at the very beginning of the inception of the story. But now for the marketing plan, it needs to involve in the big studio and to talk to the screen, to talk to the cinemas, the cinema lines, and also to include some focus group study of what kind of composition of the world audience group to make sure that there is no boundaries.
I actually just attended a meeting held by the Film Bureau, and I think we have lots of good films and goodies to offer to both Hollywood audiences and also Chinese audiences. Naja actually provide a very good case in point in terms of appealing to American audiences, for example, American Chinese audiences. Our card right now is to play a traditional card that appeals to the Chinese diaspora in the United States, in the world. For example, in Southeast Asia, we are doing extremely well with the Wandering Earth, and with the Assembly years ago, with the Hero by Zhang Yimou, and also Chen Geiger's Farewell My Concubine. Currently, I think this film also appealed to a worldwide audience because of the niche market, because of this very creative energy, and also the content, this narrative strategy, and most importantly, the values offered by this current particular film. Now, think about a young rebel teen, right? Actually, now dressed in almost like a both Japanese, American, Chinese costume with the hairdo and with the face, and look at the eyes, right? Look at the eyes, look at the face. It's no longer the traditional Naja that we see 40 years ago in that very 1979 Shanghai animation studio film product. It's a totally brand new, appealing to international audiences. The world now is facing a new China.
It seems Mulan, particularly Kung Fu Panda, did very well in the Chinese market. It seems the team behind Kung Fu Panda did a lot of research about Chinese philosophy, particularly Taoism.
Yep.
that characterizes the way of, martial arts.
It's non-stoppable, trust me. I mean, the trade war wouldn't stop if this very cultural flow in between China and the United States. Hollywood remained the very bastion of liberalism. Trump is conservative protectionism, but Hollywood remained the very flagship, flagship, sailing east and backward to the west, charging the new course, or a kind of a creative course in terms of cultural human-to-human relations, human-to-human intercourse.
Okay, thank you very much. You're watching Dialogue with Helen Hanhua and Teng Jimeng. We're discussing impact of the latest box office success, Ne Zha, based on a very famous fairy tale. Stay with us, we'll be right back. Welcome back. Disney is pocketing billions of dollars from its live-action remakes, with the most recent one being Lion King, as we discussed earlier in the first half of the program. Many viewers said they went to see the films for their childhood memories. We all had our own beautiful childhood and memories that came along with that. How do you evaluate these remakes that play to viewers' childhood nostalgia? Jimeng.
What I called nostalgia film, and I do have a nostalgic respect for that very childhood memories. But then as a film critic, when I look at those films, I don't see any real creative energy in that. I see an old story in a new bottle. I see the old lines, the young lines, all actually acting the same almost on the big screen, the same story, narrative, structure. And so this reminds me of Frederick Jameson's saying about Chinese films and world films in general. When you are in a dilemma, when you are in a market economy or in a postmodern or post-capitalist society, consumption became the norm, and then there's no creativity, and you rely on these old stories, right? The old story books to try to delve into it and find new meaning. And so that new meaning, in fact, was artificial, was manly made. And in a sense, Ne Zha is a man-made story based on a young man, Jiaozi, right? I mean, he wouldn't even given his real name. I mean, Yang something. And so, in a sense, it's nothing like a new creativity. It's still based on that very old story structure. And Lion King, once again, also based on that very new structure. And so I don't see the kind of creative energy. I see nostalgia, yes. But then what about creativity, right? What about this new idea that coming out from this one? Do we see a new story coming out of it, or do we see simply a franchise?
Well, I respect your critic comments on the remake of the old stories, but from my point of view, I think it's kind of a contradiction between a film creativity person and an investor or the industries in perspective towards the moviegoer and towards the market. To elaborate a little bit, on the one side, we all need, films or stories to be recalling our old memories, our childhood memories, while at the same time we want to see some creativity of the remake. But from the investment perspective, they want to make sure that the ROI, return on investment, is assured, especially of those remakes. So they have already calculated of those remakes, and they have decided to make a remix to make sure that the box office is in their pockets. So I think it's kind of a balance between, the remake of a total purely old story and the creativity. And I think Ne Zha actually made a very good success in keeping this kind of balance, as you put it. In the old story, it's all towards the good and towards versus bad. But now it can be good versus, it can be both good and evil.
And exactly, that could be the problem to me. I mean, it blurred the boundary of a good and bad, right? The Ne Zha right now is not the Ne Zha, I mean, given this magic power to kill the evil forces, right? To end the evil forces, creating havoc in both the heaven and in the world. Now you see this Ne Zha actually angry, funny, super kind of wacky,
flurry,
right?
Sometimes
and,
can be.
And in a sense, he could be the bad guy and he could be the good guy. And the worst thing about this all being
attraction to the Z generation, don't you think so?
And that could be a chaos. That could be
Yeah.
creating a confusion in terms of values, right? And so, all being the original evil character, I mean, now being seen as a super cool, handsome kind of a fairy guy. I mean, out there. I mean. Doing good to the general community. It's now Ne Zha actually creating this trouble for the community, using and abusing his power to set straight the record. And so even if that he actually is rebellious, sometimes I see him as a rebel without a cause. What is the cause of it? Rebelling against the parents solely for against rebellion's sake. Anti-authority. Why the authority? I mean, I see anti-social, a new anti-social type of a character. I mean, against all odds. I mean, in this general community. What about the positive energy? What about the positive contribution to a community, right? I mean, you just can't kill rampantly. You just cannot use your energy or power to conquer. I mean,
Jimeng, despite your note of confidence about the more active cultural interactions between Hollywood, which is very liberal, which is anti-Trump probably. But what do you think of the sensitivity of racial discrimination, such as the recently announced Marvel movie Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings? They raised attention on Asian stereotypes and the yellow peril. So what can you tell us about the discrimination and the stereotyping of the Chinese population in Hollywood?
It's a very long, deeply rooted phenomenon in Hollywood, right? Ever since Dr. Fu Manchu, I mean, portraying China as the evil, I mean, the kind of evil-looking, doing evil with the long pigtail and that sort of stereotyping. Now, I think.
But what about the image of Bruce Lee in martial art movies?
And
nowadays, that's a kind of departure from the traditional stereotypes.
Right. But then they're now even trashing Bruce Lee. Look at the new film by Quentin Tarantino, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I mean, Bruce Lee was presented as an arrogant, wacky, irregular, antisocial guy, bashing everyone, fighting everyone on his way. And for example, in one scene in that film, he was fighting Brad Pitt. I mean, this Western white guy, I mean, against this China person, martial art person, and Bruce Lee was kind of like using traditional Chinese gestures, and then Brad Pitt, just one gesture, Bruce Lee was falling onto the ground. I mean, sending Bruce Lee to the ground, meaning martial arts is totally a joke. So there's a lot of discriminatory practice in Hollywood right now, even until today. And so it's an issue that we need to address.
It's also echoing, the whole political, economic, and the social background of the United States, especially in the current chaotic times.
Despite smash hits such as The Wandering Earth, China's total box office declined by 2.8% in the first half of this year. Similarly, Chinese cinemas overall are not doing as well as before in the summer. Question, Helen, what are the causes of the decline in China's box office?
I don't think it can be defined so far as a decline of the box office from last year. For the past 10 to 15 years, China's box office has been outgrowing the China's GDP development, and it's a huge success. So it shows at the same time we have the progress. And we have progress moving forward aggressively, but we still have some uncertainties depending on whether the film has the right market, whether the film needs further censorship, whether the audience or the moviegoers are stable despite different macro environment. So I think the Chinese film box office, the industry itself, is still moving towards a very healthy and growing state. So I don't think there can be called a serious decline of the past year's performance, but we should watch cautiously about. From Ne Zha's success, we can also observe and analyze about the different genres of the movies, whether we can explore more genres, whether we can explore more stories, whether we can use more traditional stories as our strong base of our stories, rather than starting from scratch to use the storylines and to have the new writers.
Plus, the rating should have long been adopted by the Chinese authorities.
In a word, the Chinese movie industry is going into a more sophisticated state, that every party involved should be taken good care of that.
Well,
I agree.
That depends on whether we have a more sophisticated audience. Jimeng, how could these companies recover and stay competitive?
Well, once again, I think it has to do with the content, it has to do with
Yes.
the technology, it has to do with the creative energy that's to be input into those film creating and film making. Take Huayi Brothers, for example. They used to have quite a lot to offer, I mean, for this summer, but then for particular reasons. I mean, you see, I mean, new inputs and new films, such as Ne Zha, right? I mean, so China's film industry never lacked the energy to produce something new. And so in this sense, I'm expecting some great titles. And for example, Seven Tales About My Motherland, 我和我的祖国, I mean, this directed by Chen Kaige, and a whole host of new directors are actually offering a series of new films, new titles in the second half of this very year. And so I'm expecting a turnover, not a decline. I mean, seemingly it is a decline in terms of box office revenue, but then you will see towards the end of this year, there was quite a few of these new titles to be to be running in movie theaters.
What do you think of the high-handed crackdown on tax evasion in the movie industry? Because you know, superstar Fan Bingbing was singled out in the investigation into tax evasion by superstars. So do you think this has also contributed to the decline in the production of movies?
I don't think so.
You don't think so?
Yeah, I don't think so. I think it's bringing, you know, the movie industry into a more healthy state, because usually the movie cost investment should be divided, if not to say equally, but you know, fairly among the different contributing parts of the whole production of a movie. We cannot attribute or rely on the movie stars, purely on movie stars to contribute to a success of the movies. Like Professor Chen Qingfen pointed out, the content is the king, as well as the distribution channel also, like the production the studios. So that is, you know, the next step we should put more focus on.
But why do you think moviegoers as well as movie makers are so keen on going back to ancient times in delivering stories like Ne Zha, instead of looking into the reality and produce movies about the reform, opening up true lives and stories in urban areas?
No, I don't think so. I think the Chinese film industry is pretty much diversifying. Look at Surviving to Dying to Survive. These are great social realism films with powerful social commentaries on the injustice, inequality in our medical field, right? In Medicare field. And so in a sense, the film, once it's released, quickly address the issue that medicine is expensive, or the disputing between the medical doctors and also the patients.
Right, yes.
You don't think there is the issue of abusive use of digital technology to create a fantasy, an illusion for the young people, so that more movies like Transformers will be delivered? That's quite a distance from the reality, right?
I view it as a very aggressive test of this, you know, use of the new technology. And I also think, you know, when you mentioned about to look back of the Chinese history, to look for the good stories, I think it's one of the major characteristics of the Chinese history and the Chinese culture. But we also need a balance here, that we have more offerings of the modern films as well. So at one side, I'm expecting a sequel of Ne Zha. At the other hand, I think we are expecting more modern films.
Thank you very much for being with us. That's a wonderful discussion about the Ne Zha, a latest legend in the box office in the Chinese movie market, particularly the successful use of the IMAX format. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.